Now that we've already discussed the components of an evaluation, let's actually discuss the steps and the methodology we've identified within those components. And the first one is to analyze the business purpose. We'll start with taking a look at the criticality of the functions within that business. And we'll do that based on three levels: programs, systems, and components. We'll then take a look at the priority of the organizational programs, the supporting systems and components, based on the goals and objectives of an organization. We'll also want to take a look at the impact that an inadequate operation or loss of these functions may present to these business goals. Now we'll do that based on a document called NIST IR 8179, Criticality Analysis Process Model in Prioritizing Systems and Components. This model is actually based on criticality analysis processes that can be found within the industry from other functions. So, for instance, it originated from the Failure Mode Effects and Criticality Analysis, or FMECA process. It was first mentioned in NIST 853 version 4 in April 2013, and now the NIST IR 8179 is really mentioned in several NIST special publications. The importance of utilizing criticality analysis kind of stems back to when we talked about making sure that when you do an evaluation, you're doing it from the perspective of the system development lifecycle. And as such, the model for NIST IR 8179, the criticality analysis model, flows through design, acquisition, implementation, and also disposal of projects and systems. So let's take a look at this analysis process. There are 5 areas in the process, and as you can see on the diagram, these areas have an alphanumeric associated with them in a title, letter A through letter E, and we'll talk briefly through each one of these today. So first of all, section A, define criticality analysis procedure. Ask yourself the question, do I have a documented procedure for understanding what's most critical in my organization? If procedures exist, then conduct that criticality analysis. If procedures do not exist or are not sufficient, appropriate for the needs of criticality analysis, I would recommend that you create such a procedure. And perhaps this document and some of the ideas we talked about today can help you in that regard. When we think about this, let's start at the highest level of the organization and conduct what's called program-level criticality analysis. This would be obtaining or defining program goals and objectives, or assumptions and constraints, based on the highest level programs you have to help your business function. We do that through obtaining, designing, or documenting a high-level process for completing these program objectives or organizational objectives. By doing so, we can identify interactions, intersections, connections, and program dependencies across an organization. We also want to make sure we define how the program will operate normally and how it will operate if impacted by an adverse operating state or an operating state that is not normal. Then we can assign baseline criticality levels to workflow paths based on this gathered information. The next step in criticality analysis is to say what systems or subsystems support the programs at the higher level for the organization. So basically, we're going to want to scope or frame the analysis this next lower layer. We'll do that by identifying the necessary functionalities and capabilities to support the system and subsystems, and then specifically which systems and subsystems are used to support these higher level programs. We can then define what the subsystem or subsystem will look like when it is operating normally or when it's operating in an adverse operating state. We can then assign baseline criticality to the workflow paths identified earlier based now on the system and subsystem level. The final level is to take a look at the components and the subcomponents that make up this next layer in the model. So we identify system functionalities, capabilities, and pathways needed to fulfill functional requirements. We match the components and subcomponents to identified system functionalities, capabilities, and pathways. And as before, define the normal operating conditions that support system and subsystems from a component level, and also what suboptimal operation might occur if you have adverse operating states at the component or subcomponent level. And then we can assign baseline criticality to the components and subcomponents identified earlier. Finally, we have this map, and it identifies and maps the interactions, the intersections, connections, and dependencies across the programs, the systems and subsystems, and the components and subcomponents. It also helps us to identify the controls that we need to protect the system that we're using. It allows us to review the impact of operating states and changes in those states. And we can validate, apply, and trace any available risk information through the interactions, intersections, connections, and dependencies in our criticality mapping. So let's go through a scenario or an example of how we might use criticality analysis to map the functions of a company. In this case, we'll use the example of a perfume specialty chemical. First, we'll identify the major business purpose. Well, that's pretty easy. Let's create some perfume. What are the programs and functions at the higher organizational level that we need to do this? Well, we list them as perfume manufacturing / blending, perfume business / sales, perfume distribution, or perfume feedback storage. So let's go through each of these and see how we can go to the next layer. So we draw connecting lines representing the process flow for each of our program areas. And we can see that basically the perfume business sales is connected upward and downward, as is the perfume manufacturing blending connected to the perfume business sales. But the perfume has both the distribution and storage component. So we've got now business criticality providing evaluation guidance for where I need to put my focus. So if I want to take a look at where to evaluate and use criticality for that purpose, I can take a look at which one of these areas is most important. Should help me set context for priorities and interviews, should help me set context for priority and risk mitigation, should help me set context for priority in how I evaluate and utilize my resources. And so based on the example on the right, which is the most critical function? And what are the major systems in the diagram? And what are the subsystems in the diagram? So first, I can assign a priority for each function. And ranked 1 as least important to 10 most important. As you can see the numbers on the right. So if I lose this function, just pick a number, what happens to business purpose? What happens to other functions? What is the overall business impact? So in this case, based on those questions, I was able to ascertain that there are portions of this business that I could lose or not function properly and perhaps still have perfume. And there were others that I could not. So the criticality map can be used to identify the true impact of critical risks. It can establish priority order for which systems to evaluate, establish priorities for risk mitigation and resource allocation, and establish priorities for process modifications and change management. Now, this is a really simple example, but in this case, we can see that the perfume manufacturing blending is the most important part of our business based on priority. And that's where I should probably spend my major focus and amount of time. A very important thing to consider when you're thinking about criticality analysis and business purpose is, does my company have a cybersecurity plan? And the industrial control system processes that are used for my business, are there policies and procedures associated with that from a cyber perspective that I can actually point to? And so oftentimes companies will have a cybersecurity plan or an IT cybersecurity plan, but can they answer the second bullet? Does our company have an ICS cybersecurity plan? And the third bullet, what policy, process, and procedures do I need to consult, modify, or create to protect business critical functions? There is a cybersecurity plan appendix in this document that actually has a full listing of options for building out a cybersecurity plan and or an ICS cybersecurity plan. You'll find several sections of documents from multiple industries and multiple sectors that actually address areas within a cybersecurity plan you can utilize for creating or appending your current cybersecurity plan. When we talk about analyzing the business purpose and we review this section, we want to understand what programs are most critical to my organization. If I lose one of them, what's the business impact? Same thing with the critical systems, and the same thing with the subsystems and onto components and subcomponents.